should be the last witness of last night, and then the committee collapsed upon itself and asked him to come, and so now we have 2 weeks more. So,
Mr. Chairman, I didn't like these ties.
Is that it? Oh, okay. All right, Mr. Donnelly, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and I appreciate the patience of my friend, Mr. Sturgis from Massachusetts. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I commend you for investing so much of your time on this very important issue, at the heart of which is the question of how and what children learn. And related to that question, who gets to decide the answers to those questions? I'd like to orient you to a folder you have, a blue folder that you've got in front of you, which contains my testimony, a pamphlet on frequently asked questions regarding the Common Core, as well as a DVD that our organization has produced, which actually contains some interviews with some of the people that you've had here today over the last few days testifying. I'm a staff attorney, director for global outreach for the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, which advocates for the rights of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their children. I'm an adjunct professor of government at Patrick Henry College, where I teach constitutional law. Our organization has over 85,000 member families around the world, and many thousands here in Ohio, some of whom are here today, and I appreciate their attendance today as well. We are the world's largest homeschooling association. Our association produced this documentary called Building the Machine, which you have in your folder, which I've referenced. Now, home education continues to be a growing and flourishing movement in the United States and here in Ohio, with over 2 million children currently homeschooled nationwide, with many tens of thousands here in the great state of Ohio. Our association is concerned about what continued implementation of Common Core and its related processes here in Ohio will do to our constituents, but we are also concerned because we hear about our country, our education system in our country, and are concerned that continuing to implement a Common Core system will be bad for our nation. In the home education context, research shows there are very good outcomes academically and socially, and it's not hard to understand why. In a home education environment, you have 3 factors which contribute highly to the success of children academically and socially. This is what the research has shown. High levels of academic engagement, high levels of parental involvement, and environmental stability. Now, I've come here today to urge you to act favorably on this piece of legislation, HB 597, which, as I've read the bill before it's been passed. It's a common sense law that protects children here in Ohio from being used as pawns in a game of control, where those who control education get to decide how children think and ultimately what they believe, what values they believe. Now, as I see it, HB 597 just does a few simple but very important and powerful things. It would extract Ohio from the PARC Consortium, which is gasping its last breath these days. It calls for a norm reference and examination system, which makes sense. It requires the creation of state standards and establishes a process for doing that, where professionals, not pundits, would decide with actual public input and legislative oversight what children in Ohio are going to learn. And it protects the right of local communities to decide for themselves what standards they want to use in teaching their children. This legislation would enhance the role of parents in the education of their children, unlike the Common Core system that removes not only parents but also local and even state education authorities from education decision-making, which is not good for children. 4 years ago, virtually no one had heard of the Common Core. In fact, the Heritage Foundation released a poll that said a year ago, most Americans had never heard of the Common Core. Yet within 2 years of it being adopted, 45 state school boards had opted to endorse these untested, unproven standards, including yours. A questionable process with virtually no public input. I fail to see how this process of adopting education standards can be good for anyone. Who stands to benefit from the Common Core standards? I think this is a question we can ask. Is it the teachers in our schools who are already stretched with so many demands and requirements? Too many, I would suggest. You know, the public school teachers that I talk with, and I do encounter them because there are many who homeschool their children. They're members of our association, and they tell me what's happening in their schools. They come up to me and say, this is what's happening. Did you know this? They describe how their colleagues are stressed and pressured by the swirl of rapid implementation and the threats of high-stakes testing. Some of them say they're just ready to quit. They feel that it's no longer about children. It's about test scores, it's about data, and it's about selling curriculum. Now, how can these children not be stressed out if their teachers are stressed out? These teachers have told me that they are having significant problems with the children in their classes because of this issue. How does this benefit children? Using them as experiments in untested, non-research-driven standards developed by private entities. Who benefits from Common Core? You follow the money. You can certainly wonder about the curriculum companies who stand to net billions in profits as school districts now have to adopt Common Core aligned standards. Perhaps these are some concerns that may help explain why there is a national tidal wave of opposition to further implementation of this system. Our organization tracks legislation. We can barely keep up with the bills that are being filed around the country. At last count, over 500 that would delay, defund, or replace Common Core with state-driven processes. I think this may also help explain why the New York Teachers Union, Teachers Union, representing 600,000 teachers, retired and active along with other school professionals, withdrew its support from the Common Core. Why the Massachusetts Teachers Association recently elected an anti-Common Core president who ran against Common Core. Why states like South Carolina, Oklahoma, Indiana, and Iowa just recently, to name a few, who have decided they prefer to decide what their children are taught and how they're tested. Why dozens of states have pulled out of the testing consortium because they prefer to control the process and instruments used and to have more flexibility and input over the standards used to teach their children. Or why the New Jersey Assembly has paused implementation to review it. Why Connecticut Governor Daniel Malloy has done the same thing by executive order. You're not alone in the country questioning, asking questions, and looking at moving forward with a state-driven process. People are concerned about Common Core not just because of a set of standards, however, you've heard about that, but because it brings with it a system that includes these hastily developed and untested standards, along with the assessments, which is going to drive curriculum and the concerning data collection. They're concerned about how this system treats their children. It's a system that treats schools like factories, teachers as assembly line workers, children as raw materials, and parents and civil society as mere investors in a global economic process. Is that how we ought to see education? As a process that produces quote-unquote college and career-ready workers who are quote-unquote ready to participate in a competitive global economy? Shouldn't we see education more broadly as a means to empower individuals to attain a high level of human flourishing, if I can use that sort of soft term, to learn who they are as individuals, to use their gifts and talents, and exert their own preferences in a free society? But the problem with this liberal type of education that I've described here is that it is individualistic in nature. It defies the standardization and control and oversight that educrats, that bureaucrats like to have, and those who want to control how children learn want to have. But this begs the very question, who is or ought to be responsible for directing the education and upbringing of children? A consortium that determines what questions, which drives what curriculum, which drives how teachers teach? Is it a village that should be responsible for this? A school board? Or parents? What is your responsibility? I mean, at least as elected and accountable elected officials, you ought to be at least as involved, if not more so, in the education of your constituents' children than members of consortia or committees that are appointed not by you and have no connection to your state or who are unaccountable to you. Now, even in the absence of the full implementation of the Common Core system, homeschooled students in Ohio and around the country are grappling with an increasingly bureaucratic, state-driven education apparatus that looks far too narrowly at educational achievement. When they apply to state colleges, they face hurdles based on the fact that they were home educated. When they apply for jobs in the private sector, and even some state positions, they face hurdles because they lack a state-issued credential. This should not be. And as you move further down the Common Core process, it gets harder for our folks. Now, education, I would argue, should not be reduced to a bureaucratic, mechanistic process that standardizes people, or even standardizes these processes of education. People should be judged individually on their own merits, not solely because, or even mostly because, they have a college or career-ready stamp issued by the state, whether it's the state of Ohio or some Common Core. This is not only unrealistic, it's un-American. America is a constitutional republic. The states are sovereign entities, and they have a responsibility to their constituents to retain that local control. And our Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, said this in Pierce v. Society of Sisters. It said, the fundamental theory of liberty upon which all governments of this union repose and rest excludes any general power of the state to standardize its children. Now it says by forcing them to accept instruction from public teachers only. This is in the context of outlawing private education. But I would say that it is an appropriate quote for today when we're looking at a system that would seek to standardize children. You should not do that. We enjoy the right to private education in this country and here in Ohio quite freely. But a Common Core and state-level dominated education system creates significant problems for those who choose private education. This should not be. The state should not be so involved in education as to cause these types of problems for students. Now, this past year, this is a story you may have heard about that our association was involved with, a company called NiSource, a large company here in Ohio, refused to hire an Ohio citizen who had graduated from a homeschool program conducted in accordance with the law. This company pointed to state law as a reason for not recognizing this individual's credential. Yet this student had 2 years of state college credit on the dean's list at a state institution of higher learning here in Ohio through your PSEO program. This young man told me he thought it was probably better off that he didn't go to work for a company with such narrow views about education. But I believe that the root of this problem can be traced back to what we're talking about here today. Excessive control by the government, even state government, over education in an attempt to standardize outcomes and processes, which is not what education is about. I'd encourage you to consider amending HB 597 even now to incorporate a fix to this problem for home educated students by addressing the dependent pieces of your legislation, even as some of you at least are trying to divert Ohio from the Common Core bandwagon. Ladies and gentlemen, the Common Core is a system that crushes the spirit of teachers. It pulls parents out of the process, takes you out of the process. It stresses children out. It's a system that treats schools like factories, teachers as assembly line workers, children as raw materials, and parents and civil society as mere investors. You don't want that for Ohio. I urge you to take this opportunity, as others around the country have done and are doing, to rethink whether this is really the path you want for the citizens of Ohio.